tomorrow. If you're like me, you might just be somewhere else. I call it my spaceship. I just know I'm not here. So for many of us, building those choices in throughout the day, suggestions I often give, because we all walk around with a phone, set an alarm for random times throughout your waking day, right? So you don't even remember that you set an alarm, and at 1:30 your phone's buzzing. Why is it buzzing? This is for your consciousness check-in. The first thing we can do is note what were you paying attention to? Were you really immersed in what you were doing or who you were talking to? Chances are probably not. You were somewhere else, right? Now this gifts you the first opportunity to use either another tool you've already spoken of, your breath, right? To use that to focus your attention on your active breathing. Or if you're doing something somatic, maybe you're eating, maybe turn your attention to actually tasting the meal in front of you that you're otherwise shoveling down. The more we create more moments of that consciousness, of A, the awareness of where is my attention, and then B, that control, the more now we're becoming present to what is. And now we can really individualize the work that we're doing. If I become present to a hyperactive body, so for me, this was the commonplace. Once I landed my spaceship, I realized how stressed out my body was. My heart rate was always elevated a bit. I had a bit of shallow breathing, right? So now I can maybe use breath work. I can intentionally change the flow of my breath and actually create a new feeling in my body. So for many of us, again, it begins with choice. And within that choice, we can begin to reconnect. For so many of us, the what happens next comes from what your body is telling you, right? What is your body feeling? Are you feeling expansive and excited based on what you're doing, or are you feeling constricted and scared? And if you're feeling the latter, can you create a change? Can you breathe differently? Can you meet a need? Maybe you're hungry. Once you tune in, you can go get a snack. Can you feed your body? Can you tend to your body? When we're conscious, we can hear our body, and our body has a lot of wisdom that so many of us aren't paying attention to, for many good reasons, because being in our body was a fearful place, a scary place. We might have been abused when we were within our bodies. Though, again, building that bridge, creating that reconnection can help us then figure out, because I'm sure listeners are like, great, I'm in my body, what next? The clues are there. The more we, again, peel back that onion and learn how to listen.
I love what you said about creating a new feeling in our bodies, because I think that that's really what we struggle with. We think feelings come from how people treat us or where we visit or the place we just went to. But feelings are created and monitored also by us. And again, it comes back to the point about choice. But the idea that I say this all the time, like before I go on stage, I haven't done it for so long and I miss it. But whenever I go on stage, I still get nervous. And I've been public speaking since I was 11 years old and have done it religiously, and I will still get nervous, and I have learned to realize that that shows I care. And so I feel good about that. So now when I feel that nervousness, I'm not feeling nervousness, I'm feeling care and compassion. I'm thinking, I care about my audience. I care about how I'm going to serve today. I care about my connection with them today. So that is why I'm feeling this way. And then usually using breath work, I'll change my heart rate and the way it's feeling. And that creates a feeling as opposed to accepting the signal feeling that I'm receiving, which is nerves, anxiety, or whatever it may be. Of course, it becomes harder when it's been so repeated, and that's what we've been breaking down. I want to know, when you talk about holistic, I want to hear more about the spiritual soul side of your work, and where you've found that integration between that and science and the deep resets that you've done over the years. I'm intrigued to find what are some of the parallels, or what are some of your own personal spiritual quests or curiosities that you might be on right now that you could possibly share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you asking, because that is the third component, right? So we've talked about body. And I do believe that there's a soul, a spiritual entity, whether we want to call it that or essence, that makes us us. And I'm speaking this from a diehard scientist, that if you would have asked me about a decade ago, if anything religious-based, anything spirituality-based, I would have turned a blind eye to it. I wouldn't have believed in it. Because again, it wasn't at that point, to my knowledge, at least, mapped on in the science of knowing. So again, this wasn't something for me that was an always part of my journey. This was something I've come to discover. And what I've come to discover in the simplest way that I describe what soul or spirit is to me is the uniqueness that makes each of us different, right? There's something in me that's going to give me the life experience, the personality, the me-ness that's different from you. And at this point, whether we agree on that it's coming from a spiritual place or a soul-based place, or whether it just is an essence and is thing, I think many of us in the collective are beginning to honor that there is something else, a deeper sense of knowing. Scientifically, where I believe this inner knowing maps onto is a major organ that gets very little, kind of time in the spotlight, or at least is getting more so these days, is not our brain at all. It comes from our heart. Again, that whole place that I keep referring to, I believe it's when we're fully connected to our heart space. We now know that our heart has an incredibly strong electromagnetic field. It's sensing the world around me. It's sending out signals to the world around me, even beyond the magnetic field that my brain entails. So our heart, the me-ness, I believe, is contained in that scientific space. Very grateful for the Heart Math Institute, whose major goal is to put out this type of research. But again, I think it's peeling back the layers, understanding that there is a deeper place of knowing that is interacting with our general way of being, whether we're aware of it or not. Everyone wants to know, where's my intuition? Yeah. Where's my purpose, right, for this conversation? And again, I believe that comes from that heart space. So many of us, though, are disconnected from it or have grown distrustful of it, that we don't look to it to listen. So being holistic, again, means honoring that there is something deeper. There is a place in me, not in someone else, that knows what my path and my journey is. And again, it's cultivating that connection and beginning to listen. And then, of course, walking forth in that truth, regardless of what the world around me is doing or saying about it, which is a whole other, kind of aspect of doing and living in the work that I think many of us are up against these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that too. And I love hearing, I think for so many years, when you look at some of the most phenomenal scientists of all time, like whether it's Einstein or, others who've been able to bring together spirituality and science so wonderfully. And I always love hearing that kind of integration and integrated approach, because I do think we need both to have a healthy and powerful and insightful conversation about how we feel. I love what you're sharing about the heart. How do people start to notice the difference in the voices in their head between their heart, their mind, their ego stories? Like, is there a way? Have you found a way? Have you come across something that has helped you notice the difference between when your heart is involved in a conversation?
Yeah, and I think so. Again, first is the practice of looking. And I'm saying that very intentionally because I don't think, for many different reasons, one of which being intimidation, we don't look inward. We don't take a moment to turn off the now endless distractions of our external world and even give ourselves the opportunity to begin to differentiate those voices. We're always stimulated externally or in our thinking mind, right? So for some of us, even suggesting, right, turning it off even before you go to bed and not bringing your phone in and just giving yourself a moment of quiet when we can turn inward. For many of us, it's too close to meditation and it's too scary in there and I don't want to. So for a lot of us, it's just beginning to practice, walking through that discomfort so that I can begin to drop in and listen. To more specifically answer the question, our heart talks not in erratic. It doesn't knock us over the head, right? In something that feels overwhelming. It's kind of there. And it's just like a softer, though still understandable and hearable message. Anything that feels frenetic, anything that feels repetitive, right? Our heart's not going to on repeat tell us the same thing like our monkey mind is, right? So our heart is going to be that just like kind of behind there slow urge that's not going to feel, I think, the spike of energy that many of us are used to, or again, the repetitiveness that many of us are used to hearing in our thinking mind. And all of this becomes clearer when we begin to spend time inward, right? When you begin to notice the nature of your thought, whoever's listening, and how your thoughts kind of are reiterative and are very kind of amplified in some ways, and then learning what it's not sometimes can lead us on the road to what it is.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. And you're so right. It does take that. Like I know that the way I try and do it is for a long, long time, and I've probably mentioned this a couple of times, but I'll write down every choice I have or every opportunity I have in front of me when I'm trying to make a decision, for example. And I'll write above it the word of where I think that's coming from. So it could be like ego. Like I would choose that because it will be good for my ego. Like my ego will feel good. Or I would choose that because it will make me money. And that will be the reason. So wealth or money would be above it. And then I'm like, oh, I would choose that because I love it. Like I would choose to do that because I love it. I choose to do that because whatever. And I found that that's really helped me be really clear about looking at like, what would make me choose that? Like, what would be my reason for choosing that option, opportunity, job, item of work, whatever it may be. And then even if I accept it because all it is money or ego, I'm well aware now that this is probably not going to make me happy, but it's going to get me this thing that I think I'm doing it for. And that very honest, transparent feel allows me to be at ease and honest about my choices and also deal with the repercussions of them when things don't work out or whatever it may be. Or even when you do what you love and it doesn't work out, you know you did it because you loved it and that's all you wanted from it. And so I think that's been a really good way for me at least to distinguish between whether it's my heart, my head, my gut. Or
I love that. And what's important that you're referencing to or you're acknowledging or honoring is the honest piece of it. And I say that, in a very intentional way again, because that's hard. It's hard for us to peel back our own onion and to look at our honest truths and to label it and be with it for what it is. So many of us begin to contort things and, out of shame, out of, again, perhaps many moments where we did share truths in different ways and they weren't received and or we were, made to feel very badly about them. So, in the work I talk about, I think a lot and I, attempt to practice at all areas that self-honesty first, being honest with what it is for me in any given moment or what it isn't, just being honest before then we can even gift that honesty to someone else. Because a lot of entry points to the work is I'm not feeling satisfied in life, in my relationships in particular. I don't feel meaningfully connected to others or the world around me. Help, right? And we want to, or many of us, the pathway in or so we think is to change the world around us, right? Find that meaningful person, find that meaningful purpose, maybe even, or that path. And again, that only comes when we're first honest, when we figure out what our honest truth is, gift ourselves with that, live into that, and then we begin to have the opportunity to live honestly then in the world. And then, of course, everything begins to shift because whatever it is that we're experiencing is authentic to us. Yeah.
I find though, isn't partly our rejection of self-honesty or the times we avoid being honest, that's part of our story's defense mechanism, right? Because if you're really, truly honest with yourself, you might have to change something. And we don't want to. And so the mind or, and that's why I'm asking you, where is it coming from? That desire to be like, well, I'm not going to be honest to myself because then that breaks my story that I've been telling myself. So if I've been telling myself the story, I'm a good person, and that helps me function in the world, now that I've made a mistake, if I accept that mistake, then maybe that's going to break me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so how do we kind of nurture this idea of self-awareness and self-honesty without feeling it's going to lead to self-destruction? I think a lot of people at work, even in our relationships, it's like, if I've always been the person on time, if I'm late today, I don't want to tell people I'm late because it's going to destroy what I've lived to build up, right? If that makes sense. And I think about it in a very real way where, I look at the life I've lived and it's so like polar opposite and random and paradoxical but I'm so happy with getting to express all parts of myself today that are in love with media and that I am a monk. You were just sharing earlier today that, you were like, I'm a Russ fan, like I listen to Russ's music, but I'm a holistic psychologist. And it's like, I think the fun is in the paradoxes of people. And actually, I would suggest that I think if everyone looked at themselves, they'd find that they were paradoxical. And the paradox is what we're scared to accept because it doesn't clearly define who you are. And so it was easier for me to be a monk than who I am today, where I'm like, I think like a monk, but I don't live like one. I adopt the practices of monks, but I'm a married man, I'm an entrepreneur, and I enjoy all parts of that. And I'm learning to allow myself to accept all parts of myself. But I wonder why we're so scared of the paradoxes and how we can open ourselves up to actually realize the paradox has so much joy and potential in it. Does that, and you can disagree with me too.
No, I was smiling really big because
yeah.
it's beautiful. And what you're describing is how I describe the ego, right? We all have this story of ourself that was formed began its formation in childhood based on very real lived experiences and the feelings that we've had about them, though it's a very contained. It's only a story about an aspect or a part of who we are. However, it drops into our subconscious. Anything that goes against it feels threatening, feels scary, actually shakes my core sense of self. I don't know who I am.
And to others too.
And to others, right? And so we then live our life in defense of that story. Though for many of us, that story, like I said, is so small. It might not even apply to the current situation or the current choices that we're making day in and day out. So the goal really is to expand, is to allow in, right, through honesty, through witnessing, all aspects of ourself, because we all have all of those aspects of ourself. And the way it mainly comes out is when we see an aspect of ourself in someone else, and then we don't feel negatively about ourself because we deny that that's even in there. And then we project all of that negativity onto that person. So that's oftentimes where I offer is a great point of exploration. And I'll share one with you all. For a very long time, watching people dance on the glorious thing that is social media would make my blood boil. Watching a human just let loose, very kind of in self-expression, moving their body, my ego would say all sorts of things because at that point, I didn't identify as a dancer. I'm definitely not someone who moves my body, not comfortably, and for sure not in public, right? Meanwhile, I made it about this person that I don't know and their intention for dancing that I could never know, come to know, right? That my wounding, my not feeling comfortable in my body, again, began very early on in childhood. So I wouldn't dare to be that person that danced in public, yet I felt so strongly negative of others who did. Of course, for me, that was a pathway in to begin to explore this story that I've now began to unpack. That's a great place to look, right? When are you feeling so negatively about someone else might be at that place of shadow or that part of you that you're not willing or able to be honest. And again, we do so out of fear, out of felt threat or protection of what if the world does see this side of me, or what if I do allow this side of me to be alive right now? And again, honoring that fear that once was, because according at least to the way I framed the work, it did come at a time and a place that was adaptive. However, now we can begin to create change and embrace all of us, all parts of us.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'm glad that we're aligned on that. And you were smiling as I was speaking. I was like, oh yes, someone understands it. Tell me about how do we stop letting other people's opinions define our choices? Because you were just talking about that right now as well. The idea that you were. Maybe you're scared of putting yourself out there, or now we're judging others of why they put themselves out there. How do we stop letting other people's opinions define our choices?
Yeah, really difficult. I first want to honor how for many of us that is part of our conditioning for all of the reasons, because we had to, right, put other people in front of us, or so we thought at some time. A lot of it is kind of culturally driven. And again, it becomes our conditioning. It becomes what we do. And then we fear, right, kind of doing our own thing. We feel being judged. We fear being misunderstood. We fear all of the things associated with living in truth that might differ from the world around us. And again, there's no hack way except to practice, right, to get so connected to your truth that it doesn't mean that it won't feel painful or discouraging when someone maybe misinterprets or doesn't view you the way you imagine yourself to be in any given moment, though it also doesn't mean that you have to take their opinion or their perception over your own, right? There's always that space, I call it kind of, hearing and taking in the feedback, because feedback can be helpful. Feedback from someone who's not me offers me the distance that I might not be able to see, that objectivity that sometimes comes with the distance, and maybe the cold hard truth that sometimes comes within that objectivity that can help me. However, only if I so choose. So I always kind of describe a process of hearing, right, the feedback, and then taking it and then deciding for yourself, right? Trying on for size, seeing if it maybe you would like it to not apply and maybe it does, though not just taking it because someone else told you to or someone else is perceiving you in that way. It really is up to us. Hear what someone's saying and now observe for yourself. Do you do that thing that they're saying you're doing that, in that moment? You are the one who gets to choose. And especially, of course, for those of us who are living on social media with many different eyes of many different people at different distances from us, the feedback can be there. It can be overwhelming, and it can be very misunderstanding. Though when you have that confidence, when you know, right, that you're aligned internally, and when you do see all of the moments, if we're honest, that you are misinterpreting other people, you can make space, I think, for other people doing that for you.
I love that. That's what I found. It's like, I almost find when I'm judgmental of others, like you were saying about the dances, etc., and the idea of when I'm being critical or judgmental of someone, even if not verbally or externally, but mentally, I find that I usually am critical and judgmental of myself for the same reasons. And when I can't give grace to myself, when I can't be compassionate to someone else, I can't be compassionate to myself. And when I can't be compassionate to myself, I can't be compassionate to others. And that's just been such a difficult thing to play with. But when you kind of have that light bulb moment, it becomes so clear. It's like, well, wait a minute. How would I want to be perceived if I'd just gone through that? Whether it was a divorce, whether it was a breakup, whether it was a failure or a mistake externally, it's like, I've made mistakes, we've all made mistakes. Like, how would I want someone to deal with me? And how would I be feeling? And I think that, how do we start to empathize with people we don't know and people who we think are very different from us? Because I think it's easy to be compassionate and empathize with the obvious, i.e. someone doesn't have food or a home, you can offer some compassion and love. Someone has anxiety just like you do, you can offer some compassion and love. But when you see someone else who's got a different struggle and a different challenge, we actually really struggle as humans to have empathy. How do we start creating empathy for people that we can't relate to or don't agree with sometimes?
Yeah. So I think, I sometimes talk in universal, sometimes try to avoid it. This is one universal that I do believe very strongly in, regardless of the very distinct differences that, our essence, we are all different. I believe at our core, right, we share, three very, human needs: to be seen, to be heard, and to be loved. And I believe that unifies all of us. And most things that we're doing outwardly that might be the cause of that negative, don't love using the words positive and negative, but that less than savory reaction, right, are oftentimes the outward attempt of that human at getting one of those core needs met in that moment. So the way that we can unify the collective is, I think the work is, the final chapter in the book is called interdependence, this idea of coming back into, right, as our authentically honored selves now, into the collective. I believe we're social creatures, all of us humans, regardless if you come from a self-identified collectivist culture or not. We are humans in relationship. And again, like I said, we're not all showing up authentically and honoring ourselves in this relationship, though we are in that connectivity. And at our core, again, like I said, we want that group cohesion. We want to be seen and honored and loved. And again, many of us have all of these different adaptations and ways we go about it. But I think that can be one of the ways that we honor the humanity in each of us, is that our life is our best attempt, given all of the past circumstances, at getting those core needs met. So even if what you're seeing is unsavory in your opinion or in your experience, we can understand it, I think, through that lens. Now, of course, this doesn't mean, right, opening the door to abuse, showing up when our boundaries have been crossed. This still is creating safety to continue to get our needs met, which sometimes does mean outside of that relationship with that possibly unsavory person at this time. Though, again, we can create the empathy by focusing on the similarity.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Dr. Nicole, it's been so amazing talking to you. I'm wondering if there's something I haven't asked you or something that's in your heart right now that you feel everyone needs to hear, that you want to share, that maybe even something you've been reflecting on lately. Would there be a message that you think everyone needs to hear and experience?
I think the message that I am always offering to share first is honoring, all of the listeners out there, the curiosity, the maybe connection to your work, but just showing up. I think we diminish all of the things that we do for ourselves each and every day, or we write them off as not enough. So the first thing I want to offer is that honoring of the small choices that you are already making in your life. And again, honoring the moment that you're living in your life, because you're there. Your journey has brought you there for a reason. Maybe it's not a moment you want to stay in, though. Within that moment, like we've been talking about this whole episode, allows us to begin to make those new choices. So anyone listening can start right where they're at, right? There's no prerequisite for healing, for changing, for doing the work. This moment might be the moment you become present, the moment you develop that consciousness, and then build together those moments. And I'm here to share, still on my journey, not done. I don't believe there is that done place.
Definitely not, yeah.
Though I'm not where I once was, and I'm excited now to see into that unknown, that which was once scary and to be avoidable. I'm curious to see where my journey goes.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that message around honoring is just so powerful. We can get 9 things right that week, and we'll focus on that one thing we got wrong and make it huge and make it feel like 9 things we got wrong. And so I love that. I want to honor our audience, as Nicole's suggesting, honor each and every one of you in our community and family for showing up and being here and listening every single week. So thank you so much. Nicole, we end every episode with a final 5, as you know, the fast 5. So I'm going to ask you 5 questions that need to be answered in 1 word to 1 sentence maximum.
All right.
I believe a sentence is roughly 7 words, maybe. I don't know. I just made that up. So are you ready for your final 5?
I'm ready, and I will attempt. I am wordy, so I will attempt to keep it short.
Amazing. All right. Question number 1. What is the best advice you've ever received?
Not to assume.
Good. I like that advice. What's the worst advice you've ever received?
Worst advice I ever received is that consciousness or being present, mindfulness isn't important.
Wow. I'm surprised you said
an
that.
advisor when I was trying to do my dissertation involving mindfulness. I was actually told that verbatim. I knew that there was something suspect about that piece of advice.
Where did that come from for them? I'm intrigued. And you don't have to go into it if you don't want to.
I believe it came from a mindset of genetics. That was it. Right. You had this chip, and there was nothing else that was going to override that, kind of squashing the power of consciousness that I was starting to kind of wonder. And it took me many years to be able to utilize that. I would be lying if I said, oh, I tucked it in my belt and just became conscious nonetheless and continued to change. And I didn't. Again, it took me years to action on that practice, though. That was told to me, and I'm happy I did not listen, of course.
Amazing. All right. Question number. I made you extend that answer, so you're doing.
So that's
great.
Not my fault.
Yeah, that is not your fault. Here. I'm taking it. That was my fault. I was like, ooh. Question number 3. How would you define your current purpose?
How would I define my current purpose? Living heart-centered. I think that's where I am at on my journey, and it also is informing a lot of the teaching and the work that I am and will continue to be putting out.
Beautiful. Question number 4. What's the first thing you try and do in the morning and the last thing you do at night?
First thing I try and do is not look at my phone and take a moment for me. I say try because there are moments where I don't. And the last thing I do at night is same thing. I don't bring, just be internal.
Yeah, love that. All right, 5th and final question. If you could create one law that everyone in the world had to follow, what would it be?
One law. Living from the heart, connect with the heart. I don't know how to law that, but the law would be the heart is important. Make friends with it.
I love it. Dr. Nicole LePera, everyone, How to Do the Work. Make sure you go and grab a copy of the book. We put the link into all of the comment sections and subject areas so that you can go and grab your copy. I highly recommend it. And of course, please, please, please follow Dr. Nicole on Instagram so that you can see all our incredible posts, and tag both of us with your insights from this episode. If there's been anything that she said that stood out, an insight, a piece of wisdom, a tip, a practice that you're going to start doing, tag us both. We'd love to see it. Dr. Nicole, thank you so much for joining me. I'm so grateful that we got to meet just in time.
Of course.
And I hope to have you back on the podcast many, many times.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you for joining me.
I hope our paths continue to cross, and I'm so eternally grateful for you and your community. So